Have you ever noticed how some people seem to grow stronger the more they withdraw? Why do those who step back from the world often carry such quiet power? Why is it that silence, absence, or even distance can sometimes say more than presence? In a society that teaches us to chase, to please, to prove, there lies a paradox. True power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it leaves a room, and that's when everything begins to change. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become who you truly are if you're always adapting to who others want you to be? This video is an invitation not just to understand yourself, but to feel yourself, to witness how emotional unavailability, often seen as a flaw, might actually be a path to wholeness, a sacred withdrawal, a return to your center. So if you've ever felt like you don't quite fit the emotional mold society expects from you, if you've been told you're too distant, too quiet, too hard to reach, maybe, just maybe, there is wisdom in that space. Let's begin redefining emotional availability and reclaiming spiritual sovereignty. Withdrawal is not weakness. In fact, it may be one of the most misunderstood powers of the soul. When you begin to pull back your energy from people, places, expectations, something profound happens. Suddenly, the rules of engagement change. The energy that once flowed outward begins to return inward. You become less predictable, and in that unpredictability, you reclaim your presence. Humans, by nature, seek patterns. We like to predict how others will respond so we can feel safe, even if those patterns are toxic. But what happens when someone stops reacting the way they used to? When they stop feeding the emotional loop, that person becomes a mirror, an interruption to the system. Carl Jung reminds us, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So, when you stop showing up in the same emotional patterns, others get uncomfortable, not because you're doing something wrong, but because your silence forces them to face themselves. And this is the beginning of emotional detox. It is a sacred, often painful, unraveling. You stop taking responsibility for how others feel. You stop performing availability. You stop dancing the dance of emotional codependence. Instead, you begin to witness, to observe, and in that sacred stillness, your own essence begins to emerge. This is not about being cold. It's about being clear. It's about no longer allowing others to use your emotions as tools of manipulation. Because let's face it, when someone always knows how you'll react, they can control you. But when you begin to change, when you begin to withdraw, it creates space. And in that space, truth can finally breathe. This is the start of individuation, a key Jungian concept. It means stepping out of the collective script and writing your own. It's not always comfortable, but it's always sacred. Breaking free from the chains of overgiving and reclaiming your sacred space. From the earliest years of life, many of us are trained, conditioned to be agreeable, to be kind, to be helpful, to smile even when it hurts. We are praised for being the good child, the peacemaker, the one who doesn't cause trouble. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, we begin to equate love with obedience and worth with availability. But here lies the hidden danger. When you are always emotionally available, you become emotionally invisible. Your energy becomes expected. Your presence becomes taken for granted. And your soul begins to whisper, "What about me?" Carl Jung spoke of persona, the mask we wear to survive. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. In other words, many of us become the nice one, the strong one, the always there for everyone one, not because it's who we truly are, but because we've learned that this role is safe, acceptable, lovable. But the truth? It's a mask, a prison in disguise, a spiritual trap that keeps us tethered to the needs of others while we quietly abandon ourselves. Imagine being someone's emotional emergency button. They don't check in unless something's wrong. They don't ask how you feel because they assume you're always fine. You become the reliable light in their storm, but who stands with you in yours? The more available you are, the less people question your capacity. And over time, your boundaries begin to dissolve. You give not from fullness, but from duty. You show up not out of love, but out of fear of being replaced, rejected, or labeled selfish. But in Buddhist tradition, compassion is not self-sacrifice. It is balance. True compassion includes yourself. And so, being constantly emotionally available isn't noble, it's unsustainable. It is a slow leak of your sacred energy. And while the world may praise your giving, your soul keeps the score. In spiritual terms, you begin to fragment. You lose pieces of your essence, scattered in conversations that drained you, relationships that used you, and situations where your silence was mistaken for consent. Healing begins the moment you ask, what am I trying to prove by being so available? Perhaps you were never meant to be always reachable. Perhaps your value lies not in how often you say yes, but in how sacred your yes truly is. This part of the journey asks you to confront the fear of being too much or not enough, to peel away the persona, to begin walking back to the soul of who you are before the world told you who you should be. Because when you stop being everyone's emergency solution, you start becoming your own sanctuary. Your life force is sacred. Spend it wisely. In the unseen architecture of your soul, there exists a current, a vital, flowing stream Jung called psychic energy. This energy powers your thoughts, emotions, intentions, and relationships. It is not infinite. It is not bottomless. And yet, so many live as if it is. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist persists." When we deny where our energy is going, when we avoid the truth of our exhaustion, we feed the very cycles that drain us. Let's be clear. Psychic energy is your life force. And how you manage it determines whether you rise into clarity or collapse into chaos. You don't need to be in a crisis to feel depleted. Most people lose their energy in 1,000 subtle leaks each day. Over-explaining yourself to gain approval. Saying yes when your spirit screams no. Reliving old arguments in your mind, as if replaying them will rewrite the past. Emotionally reacting to every trigger, every message, every look. Taking on the pain of others like it's your soul's job to carry their wounds. Every time you do this, you're not just tired, you are energetically bankrupt. You are giving away your sacred currency to people, situations, and thoughts that do not invest back in you. This isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. It's like trying to fill a leaking bowl with holy water. No matter how much you pour in, it never feels enough, because your essence is escaping through the cracks. Jung understood this profoundly. He believed that psychic energy, when misdirected or repressed, would manifest in unhealthy ways, through neuroses, projections, even self-sabotage. Imagine this. Every act of emotional overextension is like feeding ghosts. Ghosts of who you thought you needed to be. Ghosts of old relationships that still echo inside you. Ghosts of unmet needs you've been trying to fulfill in all the wrong places. And the more you feed these ghosts, the more invisible you become to yourself, until you look in the mirror and ask, where did I go? But here's the awakening. When you begin to reclaim your energy, when you recognize that silence is powerful, that stillness is an act of courage, that no can be a sacred word, you stop leaking. You start glowing. Managing your energy is not about selfishness. It's about sovereignty. You were never meant to be emotionally drained just to keep others comfortable. In Buddhist understanding, wise use of energy is an act of mindfulness. It's the middle path between indulgence and deprivation, between chaos and peace. So ask yourself now, where does my energy go each day? Who or what am I feeding that feeds nothing in return? What would my life feel like if my energy was mine again? This is not just healing. This is remembering that your soul was never meant to be a fuel source for someone else's fire. What the version of you they're upset with was never really you. There's a quiet game being played in many relationships, a game of unspoken expectations, emotional guilt, and carefully placed silence. It's called projection. Carl Jung warned us. We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. He meant that most of what we think about others is a reflection of what we haven't faced within ourselves. But what happens when you become the screen onto which others cast their fears, desires, and unresolved wounds? You become the strong one, so no one checks if you're tired. You become the giver, so people stop asking if you're okay. You become the fixer, so they never bother fixing themselves. And one day, you wake up buried beneath identities you never chose. This is the first layer of psychological manipulation, when others expect you to play roles that suit their comfort, not your truth. But it doesn't end there. Manipulators rely on your predictable reactions. They know how to pull your guilt strings. They know silence will make you anxious. They know that if they frown just right, you'll come running to explain, fix, or please. This is emotional blackmail at its most subtle. Guilt, I guess you just don't care anymore. Obligation, after all I've done for you. Silent punishment, long pauses, cold shoulders, ghosting without a word. And so, you play your part again. You react, apologize, overcompensate. And the cycle tightens around your spirit like a noose. But what if you stopped? What if, instead of reacting, you simply remained silent? It's in this space of stillness where a profound shift begins. Because when you no longer play the role, the game breaks. Your silence becomes a mirror, and those who relied on your reaction are suddenly faced with themselves. No one to blame, no one to guilt, just their own reflection. This is uncomfortable, and that's good, because transformation is uncomfortable. When you stop reacting, people may accuse you of being cold. They may say you've changed. They might call you selfish, distant, or difficult. Don't be alarmed. This is not your truth. This is their withdrawal from the identity they assign to you. It hurts to be misunderstood. It aches to feel rejected for simply stepping into your authenticity. But it is also the price of freedom. The truth is, when you break the projection, you force others into a confrontation with their own inner world. And that is where true healing begins, though not always immediately, and often not visibly. In Buddhist teaching, silence is not a weapon, but a mirror. It reveals. It doesn't punish. It calls forth awareness without using force. So, if you've ever been told, you're not who you used to be, take it as confirmation. You've stopped performing. You're not who they needed you to be. You're becoming who you truly are. And in doing so, you're not abandoning anyone. You're simply refusing to abandon yourself. There is a silence that suppresses, and there is a silence that liberates. Most people misunderstand silence. They think it means avoidance, repression, or weakness. But conscious silence is not passivity. It is presence. It is the power to be fully aware without being pulled into reaction. Let's be clear. There is a difference between strategic silence and emotional suppression. Suppression is when you silence yourself out of fear. You bite your tongue to avoid conflict. You hold your breath so others won't feel discomfort. You stay quiet, not from strength, but from survival. That is not self-mastery. That is self-erasure. But conscious silence is different. It comes from awareness, from restraint, from choosing not to leak your energy into chaos. It's the kind of silence that holds weight in a room. The kind of silence that disrupts manipulation, not by fighting it, but but by no longer feeding it. It says, I see what this is, and I choose not to participate. This silence is not emptiness, it's amplified presence. It commands. It protects. It teaches. Real life example. Imagine someone trying to provoke you, blaming, yelling, accusing. In the past, you might have defended, justified, pleaded, but now you stay still. You feel everything, but you don't spill anything. Suddenly, the dynamic collapses. They don't know how to play the game anymore, because silence removes the fuel. This is energetic sovereignty. And it's not easy, because silence doesn't just expose others, it exposes you, too. It forces you to sit with your own discomfort, your own desire to be liked, understood, validated. Carl Jung wrote, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the kind of silence he was speaking of. The silence where you confront your own shadows. The silence where you realize how much of your identity was shaped by performance. In Buddhist wisdom, right speech is one of the eightfold path. But within right speech is also the wisdom of right silence. To speak when speech serves truth, and to be silent when silence holds more clarity than words. It's in silence that you remember your alignment. You return to your center. You begin to discern what is yours to carry and what never was. So the next time you're baited into emotional chaos, ask yourself, am I reacting to protect a false self or responding for my truth? Because silence, when chosen with awareness, is not withdrawal. It's arrival. It's the moment your energy stops leaking outward and begins to flow inward, back to your root. This is the mark of spiritual maturity, not in how loudly you defend your peace, but in how quietly you embody it. So hold your silence like a sacred flame. Let it burn away what no longer serves. And in the stillness, listen not just to what others say, but to what your soul has been whispering all along. Let's pause and breathe into everything we've just uncovered. Withdrawal is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the quiet return to your own sacred center. Silence is not absence. It is presence pure, potent, and unshakable. You were never meant to be everyone's solution. You were not born to be an emotional emergency button, pressed over and over until your soul forgets its shape. So ask yourself now, who are you without the reactions? Who are you when you're no longer defined by being needed, liked, or useful? You are not your defense mechanisms. You are not the peacekeeper in someone else's war. You are not the mask you wear to avoid rejection. You are something older, deeper, quieter. Carl Jung once wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That becoming is not loud. It does not beg for approval. It does not perform. It withdraws. It watches. It chooses. And in that choice, your real power returns. So here is the invitation. Reclaim your energy. Stop bleeding into battles that aren't yours. Stop rehearsing the role of the good one. While your soul whispers for freedom, you are allowed to disappoint people. You are allowed to be misunderstood. You are allowed to choose stillness over chaos. Because sovereignty doesn't always look like bold action. Sometimes it looks like sitting silently in the fire and no longer flinching. As this journey closes, let these final words anchor in your heart. When you stop reacting, you stop bleeding. And in that stillness, you begin to remember who you are, not someone's puppet, not a mirror for their needs, but a whole sovereign being, worthy of peace, worthy of boundaries, worthy of your own sacred becoming. Transformation is not only possible, it has already begun. And now, your silence speaks louder than ever.